Welcome back to another episode of Multifamily AP 360. And today's our guest is Gene Trowbridge from Trowbridge NA LLP. Welcome, Gene.
Thank you, Rama. I'm glad that you invited me. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And a little bit about Gene. As a founding partner of Trowbridge NA LLP, Gene's law practice concentrates on the syndication of commercial and investment real estate through both debt and equity. Gene has represented over 800 clients in this area of practice. The median offering size is 3 million, but he has done individual offerings of over 8 billion. His practice writes offerings under Rule 506B and 506C of Regulation D. As former syndicator who for 10 years raised investor capital through the broker-dealer community, is able to communicate with his clients on both the technical and the practical aspects of state and federal securities laws. His book, It is a Whole New Business, is really how-to manual on real estate syndication. So with that, Gene, you want to add anything to your background?
Not really. I think the most important thing that my clients experience with me is that I come from the side of being a syndicator. So for 10 or 15 years, I was out raising money. We built self-storage facilities in Southern California, and I worked with a lot of attorneys. So I have a lot of experience of attorneys working with me. So when I was 45 and decided I'd go to law school, I decided that I would just do one thing. I would be a securities attorney. And then my experience on both sides of the table is helpful. I'm certainly known as a mentor to people who are coming into the business, and I appreciate that role.
Awesome. That's a remarkable journey. So from syndicator to securities attorney, can you walk us through how your experience in raising capital shaped your transition into security laws?
Yes, when I was raising capital, I was using the broker-dealer network, and that was a different time. And broker-dealers could raise and would raise money for LLCs and limited partnerships. But toward the end of my career there, the real estate investment trusts, the REITs, came up. And one of the negative things about doing LLCs and LPs is the lack of liquidity. A real estate investment trust doesn't have the same problem with liquidity. So the broker-dealer network pretty much moved from selling products like mine to selling REITs. And that made quite a difference. At the time that I decided to leave the business, I remember I sent out 1,687 K1s the last year.
Yeah.
Representing a lot of investors. It was either I was going to grow or I was going to cut back, and I just decided I'd cut back.
Sure. Thank you. So would you elaborate a little bit more on
the lack of liquidity? I guess that's probably the fourth question I think an investor should ask. I think a passive, when they get started, should ask, number one, Rama, if I give you my money, what happens if something happens to you? So our company has a policy. We won't do an offering where the general partner or the managing member is just an individual, because there's no continuity. That causes us trouble when we go to the lender to get loans and with the investors. That's just not right. The second question I think an investor should ask is, hey, Rama, have you done this before? We all had to say, no, I haven't done this before when we get started, but we must have something in our background that prompts friends and families, if you would, to help us get our first deal done. You got to get that first deal done. The third question is, Rama, are you going to put any of your own money in this deal? And I think to some extent, we all have to have skin in the game. Then the fourth question is what you're asking about. What about liquidity? The answer to that question is, let's look at the operating agreement. And in our operating agreement, Articles 11 and 12 talk about liquidity. There's voluntary liquidity. I want to give my units to my kids. I'm getting a divorce and we need to split the ownership. I want to transfer my units into a trust. All that stuff that you want to do yourself is voluntary liquidity. And one of the things is I'd like to sell. It's time that something's happened in my life. I'd like to sell. So how do you structure a sale of a member's interest in an LLC? The operating agreement, most operating agreements are pretty similar. They say if you want to sell, you bring your request to sell to the manager, and then the manager takes it to the other members and see if there are other members who would like to purchase your units. If there are some units left that haven't been sold there, then the company maybe has the money that they can buy those units and retire those units. And then if that doesn't happen, lastly, the manager should be able to buy those units. And if none of that totally sells all the units, then the investor can go out to the marketplace. The problem is the investor really doesn't have any way to find someone who wants to buy their units. So that liquidity is a problem. Then there's the involuntary liquidity. You get sued and the court wants all your assets. You're in a disputed divorce and there's an argument about who gets what, or you file bankruptcy and the court wants all your assets. We need to be able to get the court out of all this, keep the court away from our partnership, our LLC. So we have some plans in there that allow the company at that time to step in and buy from the court using the company's money.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you very much for explaining that. And also those are solid questions. So thank you. So you represented over 800 clients. So what are most common mistakes when launching their first deal?
I think the most common mistake is, well, maybe there are three. First of all, not giving yourself enough time. In what I call my homework calls, when people call me and say, how am I going to do this? How am I going to get started? I always say in 90 days, from the time you sign the letter of intent, you need to have 90 days until there's a closing. Sometimes in the marketplace, sellers are only willing to give you 60 days. Then you need to negotiate an extension. Or sometimes the sellers are so happy to see you, they'll give you 90 days. But 90 days, because in the first 30 days, you're doing your due diligence. You're looking for lenders. You're talking to your securities attorney. And eventually, 30 or 45 days from the day the purchase and sale agreement is, you have a loan that you're processing, and I've given you the papers that let you go out and raise money. And I think it takes about 30 days to raise the money, even if you think investors are ready to go the minute you ask them for the check.
Yeah.
Many times they aren't. There are things that are happening. I just had a wedding of my daughter last week, and we thought it was going to be in October, and she changed it to April. And if I had a commitment to invest in your deal, I might not have if you called me last week for the money. So things change. So I think we need 30 days. That's number one experience. I think a number two mistake is trying to do a blind pool when you don't have a track record. And I think that goes along with doing a 506C in advertising. If you don't have a track record, who's going to send you $50,000 if they don't know you and you don't have a track record? So I think the best advice is to do a specific offering on your first deal, not a blind pool. And I guess probably the third mistake is syndicators think they're going to get rich off of their first one or two deals, and they try to front end their fees, take money out for fees before it actually gets invested in the property. I think you should get paid for sure. This is not a GoFundMe project. This is not a charity. You should definitely get paid for the risk you're taking, but you should get paid at the same time that your investors make money. I'll throw one other thing out there. I come from a real estate education platform called the CCIM platform, and I have a lot of people who've taken all those courses. When they come in, they talk about the waterfall. It's way too complicated. Not every investor knows what an IRR is. So don't make it if it's too complicated, investors are not going to invest with you because they don't understand. Not that they don't like the deal or you, they just don't understand. So it's a reason to say no. Yeah. Those are my mistakes.
Sure. Yeah, great points again. Thank you very much. Coming back to this one, Regulation D, right? Can you explain the difference between 506B versus 506C offerings under Regulation D? And
Sure.
how do you advise clients on which route to take and any latest changes in this Regulation D?
Well, I'll give you some background. Every year, the SEC comes out with a report on the volume of business. When we do a Regulation D offering, we send a Form D to the SEC. And that's really just an information gathering form. And they take all that and they add it all up. And they came out with the report. And for 2024, which was the most recent report, the private placement market, we're not going to Wall Street. We're doing private placements. We're doing Reg D, Reg A, crowdfunding, all that, was a $3 trillion business. Okay. And $2 trillion of that is in Regulation D. So that's really the major chunk of where money is raised in Regulation D. Now you have to remember the history of Regulation D was in 1981. I was syndicating at the time. Regulation D came out and gave us all these rules that we didn't have before. That's when it gave us the rule of an accredited investor. What's a definition of accredited investor? And then it came out with 506. It was just simply 506. And 506 said you could raise all the money you wanted. You could raise it from as many accredited investors as you could find, because you were not advertising. You knew the investors, and that would allow the accredited investors just to check a box on the subscription agreement saying that they're accredited, and you would know them well enough to know if that sounds like the truth. And in addition, something that was brand new in Reg D, Rule 506, was the ability to take 35 sophisticated investors. See, prior to Reg D, we didn't really have a definition of accredited investors, but we could only take people who were rich and smart. So we didn't know what that was.
Yeah.
So now we know what rich and smart is. Back in 81, it's $1 million and so forth. But in order to promote capital formation, they thought they would open it up to 35 people who aren't accredited but are smart enough to read the book and understand the risk. But no more than 35. The SEC was managing the risk of these offerings because they really didn't know how well the offerings were going to do, so they wouldn't let more than 35 people lose all their money. Okay.
Yeah.
They use the term risky schemes. Okay. So that went on till 2012, until the Jobs Act. That was how we raised money. And then the Jobs Act came along and Congress said, in order to promote capital formation, maybe we need to let sponsors advertise for accredited investors. I think about me when I was doing it when there was no advertising. People who knew me could invest in my, but the only people I could talk to about my deals were people who knew me. So there are a lot of investors out there who I always thought would have loved to invest in building self-storage facilities, but I couldn't find them and they couldn't find me. So here comes 506C and it says, Gene, go out and advertise. Find people you don't know. If you've got a track record and you're effective in what you're doing, you can get the accredited investors to invest with you, and they're rich and smart, so they don't need any protection. So 506C came along and said, raise as much money as you want with as many accredited investors, find them any way you can. We may have to have a third-party verification that they're accredited because you don't know them. Okay, so no more check the box. Some verification is important, and you can advertise and solicit, but no sophisticated investors. It's too risky for a fund like that. So they laid that out. Historically, what's happened in 506C is the volume of offerings in 506C has gone down every year. Right now, according to the 2004 report, 95% of the Reg D offerings that the SEC works on are 506B, and 75% of the investors are accredited. So the ability to use sophisticated investors is great, but it isn't all that wonderful. And advertising, if you do advertise once or twice and you build your database, make a substantive relation with people, you don't have to advertise the next time. Bring them all into your 506B. And one of the things that the accredited investors like about 506B is they just have to check the box. They don't have to go through the third party. Rama, I will tell you, my most prolific syndicator, when I started with him, he said he wanted to do 506B and he only wanted accredited investors, period. He didn't have to do that, but that's what he said, and no advertising, just people with whom he had pre-existing relations. And we did 160, up till this point, we've done 164 offerings with that company with the same policy, 506B, only accredited investors and no advertising. His advantages were all of his investors were accredited and they didn't want to go through Verify Investor or the third party, so he could just have them check the box. And number two, they're all rich and smart. So if times get rough, you've got people out there that hopefully can withstand the rough times. Now, I will tell you, he hasn't done a deal in 18 months because 5 of the 164 offerings are facing capital calls, bridge loans, and cap rates. And until he solves those problems, he's not interested in going to the market and raising new funds. But out of 164, he only has 5. So he has a good group of investors that are ready for him when he's ready to continue.
Yeah, that's a good. So how can new sponsor build credibility and trust with investors when they don't have long track record like you mentioned now?
Well, if they don't have a track record, let's just take me. I didn't have a track record being a syndicator, but I was a commercial real estate broker. I owned a few properties myself, so I was an investor, and I was involved in the CCIM program as an educator and a book author and all that. So I had a lot of that stuff going on. And what I found was when I started telling people that I might, well, every syndicator gets to be a syndicator because they don't have enough money to buy everything they want. Okay, so I found a building and I was in St. Paul when I was living there. It was a 7-unit apartment building and I wanted to buy it, but I didn't have enough money to buy it myself. So I started talking to the people I knew. And what I found was they all knew I was in the real estate business and they all knew I was successful on my own, but they didn't have time to invest in real estate. They didn't know enough about it. They had a job. And back in those days, we all had a house and we had life insurance and we were raising our babies. But we did have, in this case, the 4 people I grabbed all had $10,000 that we could all put together to help buy this property. The people who are going to invest with you early on have to be the people with whom you have a relationship with, who know or think they know, or you're going to tell them that what you do in the real estate business is something that has made you successful. And let's not sell them anything. Let's let them be part of your opportunity. Here's an opportunity I found. I think it's a good deal. I can't do it myself. Would you like to come with me? And then once you get the first deal done, that second question goes away. Have you done this before? Shit, yes, I did it once. That's okay.
Yeah.
It's a start.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for explaining that. Yeah. Awesome. So coming back to your book, it's a whole new business. It's considered a must read in the industry. So what inspired you to write it and how do you hope it's used by sponsors and investors?
The first edition I wrote was quite a while ago. And I wrote it because, and the title tells me, because my world is, at that time was commercial real estate brokers. And I found a lot of commercial real estate brokers who were going out and buying properties with 4 or 5 other investors. They didn't know it was a security. They thought, I'm just putting investors together, buying a property, we're using a limited partnership or whatever, and that's fine. But they didn't know. So I wanted to tell them that when you're going out and pooling money from other investors and you're in charge of the money, you're in the securities world. And that's a whole new business. Don't worry about what the real estate says. The security laws have to do with how you raise money from investors, regardless of what the product type is. Doesn't make any difference. But so that's why I wrote the book. And the most telling chapter was the securities law, chapter 5. And then my book, I'm in the 4th edition now. Every time we've had a major securities law change, I've updated chapter 5. In the 4th edition, I added a chapter on tenants in common because I found that in the marketplace, people who had purchased properties in 2010 or 2015 all of a sudden had a lot of equity, and they didn't really want to manage real estate themselves anymore. So they'd like to go in with someone else as a tenant in common, a fractional interest, and buy a bigger property and let someone else manage it.
Yeah.
That's a security.
Yeah.
And not everyone knew that. And there are some rules, some IRS rules about tenant in common that you have to know. Whenever there's a big change, I'll come out with a new.
Yeah. So it's 1031, right? Something similar to 1031.
Yes, the problem with the tenant in common rule is that in 1031, there's an exception. The exception is partnership interests don't qualify for 1031. So if you put together a tenant in common, let's say both people own 50% of a property, but one person is in charge, makes the decision on financing, selling, keeps an override, has a promote on this side.
Yep.
It's a partnership. And so because the tenant in common industry was so strong up until 2008, the IRS issued some rulings. They issued a revenue procedure telling you how you could do a tenant in common deal and not have it be a partnership, so it will qualify for a 1031 exchange. And that revenue procedure is still the law today. And a lot of sponsors think, I'll bring in someone over here with $3 million and they can take 30% ownership, and I'll take an 80-20 split on theirs, and I'll take a sale proceeds. And no, that 30% has their own deed, and it's that own deed is treated like it's their own property. You can't do anything with their property. Now, you can have a property management agreement, sure, that's fine, but major decisions and revenue sharing and all that, you have to keep it separate. Not everyone understands that.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So would you share any of your best experience so far?
My best experience always is mentoring. I mean, when I will tell you the client I talked to you about with 164 offerings, I went into the meeting, it was a face-to-face meeting, which I don't always have, to get a new client. And there were 4 people sitting at the table, and they told me what they wanted to do. They were all new to the business, and I told them what I thought. And I left that room and I said, they're not going to hire me. That didn't go very well, and they'll probably hire someone else. By the time I got back to the office, they called me and said, we want to do our first deal with you. And I was very surprised. So what's a success story is taking them into the business so that they can do 164 offerings. I probably have 10 clients that have done more than 30 offerings with me. There are a lot of clients that do one and say, gosh, this isn't really what I want to do. Maybe they weren't as well equipped as they thought. We got the deal done, and that's fine, but maybe doing another one isn't so good. And it's really a people business, Rama.
Yeah.
You have 800, 900 investors. I mean, you're constantly involved with the people. Probably you have a property manager doing the property. You might do some reviews of what the property does, but you're not there every day. But you're in the office every day talking to your investors and communicating. So it's a people business, and that you do 3 deals with 30 investors, and all of a sudden you have 100 investors. Your life has changed. So I think that's something to be concerned about. I know that I've surveyed in the years a lot of clients, and the 2 things that I found was, number 1, the care and maintenance of partners becomes overwhelming at some point in time. Absolutely what happened to me. And number 2, the risk is always greater than you think. If you think back about it, in 2018, we were putting together apartment deals, right? We didn't know that the pandemic was going to come along, and all of a sudden you couldn't inspect units. People who couldn't pay rent didn't have to pay rent. All sorts of things happened. You didn't expect that. And gosh, in 2021, when interest rates went from 3 to 7 overnight,
Yeah.
no one expected that. There's always something coming up. I've been through the Tax Reform Act of 86. Sometimes the government causes you problems by surprising you, but there's always something in the future that you just can't reasonably predict. And that's a problem.
Yeah. Would you also share any
Challenging experiences right now? Let's talk about what's challenging right now, is going back to the investors and saying we need more money so we can buy another 2 years on the mortgage with the lender, and we need to have our interest rate fund available. They don't always understand that. I think that the description of risks in the PPM, when we talk about the financing we were going to use to buy the property, was typically a bridge loan. If you're using agency financing, you don't have to worry about this. But if you're using a bridge loan that's 4 or 5 years, and we're now right in the height of it, that disclosure probably should have been stronger on what would go wrong. But once again, no one knew the interest rates were going to double almost overnight. That's a challenge. I've seen clients commingle funds. One property is struggling and they have another syndication that has some money in the bank, and they grab the money and put it in the other deal, and that'll send you to jail. That's challenging. And people's lives change. What do you do if you're the syndicator and someone calls you and said, my husband just died and I need my money? How do you deal with that? And that's why you have to look at what does the operating agreement say about that? And you know what happens if you can't deal with it? The next call you get is from an attorney representing the widow. Why is it that you put this family in this risky scheme and now they can't exist without their money? How are you going to deal with that, Mr. Trowbridge? Okay, so those are challenges that you have.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. What's next for you on the Trowbridge NA LLP in 2025 and beyond?
Here's what I'm looking at as we go through the end of 2025 and 2026. Business is down. The number of transactions has dropped. 2021 was the height of the business, probably nationwide $5 trillion. We're down to 3. I think what we're looking at is, number one, what is going to happen to interest rates? I don't think 6 or 7% interest rate is unusual. I've been around longer than you have, and at one time I had a 13% interest on my home loan.
Yeah.
So 6 or 7% is pretty much a reasonable interest. But too many people came in the business in 2021 when interest rates were 2 or 3, and they think that's normal. So we have to see what's going to level out with interest rates. I think that'll be important. I think another thing we need to think about is the tax law. For example, I have a client who does car washes. They go out and buy car washes, and a car wash is all personal property. So it's immediately deductible, it's cost segregation, it's great tax benefits. They're not doing another deal now until they find out what Congress does about the tax laws going forward. Okay. And then the third thing I'm thinking about is a change in the definition of accredited investor. And I think about that every single year, because back in 81, when they said $1 million net worth, $200,000 as an individual tax return, and 300 married filing jointly, 3% of the households were accredited. Okay, 3%. Today it's closer to 20. And that's too much for the Securities Exchange people. They think too many people are risking everything and these risky schemes. And the first reaction they took in 2008, when they took the value of your home out of the definition of your net worth, and that cut it back quite a bit. As things continue to appreciate and earnings keep going up. We still are back at about 20%. And the last thing I heard, which would be interesting, is they're thinking about retirement funds. What if they decided that you shouldn't be risking your retirement funds like you shouldn't be risking your home equity in these risky schemes? They could just simply say your net worth calculation has to be minus your home and minus your retirement funds. That would make a big deal. They think that would take them down to about maybe 12% of the households being accredited. That's something I know that I read about constantly that they're thinking about.
Sure.
So those are the three things: interest rates, the tax law, and any changes in the accredited investor definition are the things I'm concerned about. And I guess the major thing as far as deal structure goes, Rama, the sellers haven't come to grips with what the current value of their property is. And the buyers are certainly looking to buy at current value. So that's going to keep the number of transactions down.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. So, any personal habits that are helping you to be successful?
My personal habits to be successful are, number one, I answer my phone. I can't tell you how many times I go to a trade show and I stand at my booth and people come up to me and say, I'm using someone else, but I can never get a hold of them. I can get a hold of someone in the office, but I can't get a hold of them, and they wrote my documents. So I don't have a secretary. I don't have anything. I answer my own phone. That's a personal habit. And another personal habit that's done me very well is doing what I call education-based marketing. I have an active YouTube channel. I do a lot of these podcasts. I do a lot of my own podcasts, my own recordings, and I'm always trying to educate people, not sell them anything, but educate them and hopefully convince them that if they have a question, they want a homework call about what's it like to be a syndicator, I'd be a good person to talk to. When they call, I'll answer the phone. Those, I think, are my best personal habits.
Awesome. And would you also share any recent books that impacted you?
Any recent books that I've read?
Yeah.
I get that question all the time. I generally read fiction. I don't read a lot of current events and stuff. I just reread 1984 because I think that is an interesting book for this time. So I don't do that. But I will tell you one thing that you probably don't know. I have a podcast that has nothing to do with real estate. My podcast is, Hey, Am I Adopted? And my whole family is adopted. My wife, my two daughters, and myself were all adopted. And so my youngest daughter and I decided we would start a podcast just to talk to adoptees. And we're in our second year, and it's on Apple and Spotify and everything. It's just simply, Hey, Am I Adopted? And we interview people who are adopted. And there's a lot that goes on in your mind through your life as a result of being adopted. And my daughter does it with me. She's in her 40s. I'm in my 70s. We have different viewpoints. I reached out to find my biological parent. She hasn't. We actually had a daughter who died, basically addiction, because she couldn't deal with being abandoned and the rejection of her mother. She couldn't deal with that. 17 years she struggled, and she finally just overdosed. So we have a great set of experiences, and we do that podcast. We record every Monday.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that. So how can listeners connect with you, Gene? Yeah.
The website is TNLLP, the name of our firm, Trowbridge NA LLP, just TNLLP.com. And my phone number, if people are looking at the screen, is 949-570-1507. And of course, it's Gene at TNLLP.com.
Awesome. And thank you very much, Gene. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Sure.